Hello everyone. Today's video will be showcasing my collection of painted miniatures from a couple of tabletop games that I've been interested in over the years. Hope you all enjoy, and let's get started. Starting off with Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. I don't have many of these, as I tried to be a minimalist dungeon master, so when we played in person I often just used dice to denote monster positions. But if you're going to have a mini for any character in your game, it might as well be the antagonist. This is Strahd von Zarovich from the Curse of Strahd campaign, which was one of the first campaigns I ever ran. When I started DMing for my friends, I was totally new to D&D, as were several of them. So I wanted to focus on the classic adventures from the game's history. And I was always a fan of horror, and gothic horror in particular. So this was right up my alley with all the vampires, werewolves, skeletons, zombies, etc. The original Ravenloft campaign was released back in 1983, but I went with the more modern 5th edition version, which was an awesome adventure with tons of content to experience. So I guess that's my review of the Curse of Strahd campaign. Thumbs up, had fun, try not to get eaten. Speaking of the mini itself, Strahd is basically a legally distinct Dracula, so that's how I played him. A charismatic villain who would show up often to torment the player characters, to try and break their morale or tempt them to his side. Since Strahd showed up frequently in the story, one of my players gave me this mini to use during the campaign. I believe he printed this model himself, as it doesn't match any of the official sculpts I found online. And I believe he also painted this one himself as well. As you can see, it's a fantastic job that matches the modern official art of Strahd. So the mini really made an impact every time I put him on the table. Most of my time in D&D was spent as a dungeon master. I always ran the games, but rarely played in them. I always liked the storytelling and role-playing aspects of the game, and I wasn't afraid to ham it up and do the voices, so DMing was a better fit for me. I did play in a couple campaigns, generally nothing long-term, but my earliest and most played character was Sky Sunhammer, a lawful good monk of the open hand. His stats were awesome, so he was a combat powerhouse, but his backstory wasn't really fleshed out, and I played him as kind of a generic, naively optimistic good guy character, so he wasn't really that interesting. I've made better characters for later campaigns and different RPG systems, but nothing that ran long enough to justify getting a mini for them. As for the mini itself, this one was an official product, a generic mini that was part of a 2-pack of monks, so it didn't really match with my conception of the character's design, but it worked well enough as a placeholder. My partner at the time was the one who painted it, but neither of us was familiar with mini painting at the time, so I can't really say what materials or techniques were used, and the paint job was never finished. I only just glued the base on him, so he was a bit clumsy on his feet when I played him years ago. But now he sits confidently on my shelf as a reminder of adventures long ago. A bit of backstory on this one. One of my hobbies is doing stand up comedy at venues in my area. I started in 2012 and it has certainly been my most enduring creative hobby. I've got several nerdy tattoos and I've had a few bits about tabletop gaming in my sets over the years. And one of the other comedians who was also into nerd stuff took notice and gifted me this mini. I believe this is the Minsk and Boo sculpt from the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures line. And the base is huge compared to other D&D minis because he used a poker chip which was painted and signed. The painter doesn't seem to have used any existing official color scheme for Minsk, instead opting for one that, in my opinion, exudes a more sinister tone, with the black fabric elements and the blood-specked gravel and skulls on the base, which is a great little detail. The ashen skin tone suggests that Minsk was corrupted or zombified, which would definitely be a fun adventure hook for players, having to find a way to rescue a hero who has become thrall to evil powers. And that's part of the magic of tabletop role-playing games. You see something that inspires you creatively and you can channel that energy into crafting a memorable experience for you and your friends. The next several showcases will be miniatures that I've painted myself. I've been a huge fan of the BattleTech franchise ever since I caught an episode of the cartoon as a kid. I'll probably talk more about the franchise and my history with it in another video, but for now we'll focus on the war game, which launched back in 1984. I actually haven't played any iteration of the tabletop game as of this recording, but I've been collecting and painting the minis for about a year now, and I'll be showing them in roughly the order I painted them so you can judge my artistic journey. BattleTech features a number of awesome mech designs, but my favorite by far is this one, the Timberwolf, which might be an obvious pick, but I think its popularity endures for a reason. You can see this mech being used in the promotional material for several products over the years, most recently in the MechWarrior 5 Clans video game and the Clan Invasion box set for the tabletop game. This was the first mini I ever painted, so I mostly went for a simple color scheme that I wouldn't have too much trouble executing. This one was primed in black by a friend of mine, and I left that primer as the primary color. I used metallic gray for the weapons and a deep blue for the legs, with the splash of red for the cockpit canopy. I lacked any good washes for this one, but I did dry brush the darker spots with white, which I really love the weathered effect that it created. I used a thick mud paste on the base and colored that over with tan, which has the appearance of the mech walking over sand, which is a nice contrast to the rest of the color scheme. Looking at the footage now, I can't help but notice the missed spots and mold lines that I should have addressed, but hey, you gotta start somewhere, right? Next up is the Griffin, and it's at this point I should mention that I'm a huge fan of nerdy cross-franchise references, and that'll get more apparent as we go. I did come up with a reason why my mercenary unit would have such bright, garish color schemes that are hilariously unsuited for combat, but that's another talk for another time. I did this Griffin using a color scheme based on Sailor Moon, which is another property I've loved since I was a kid. I knew I'd need a symmetrical mech design to make it work, and this Griffin variant with the two missile pods gave me exactly what I needed, as I could use gold and red to give them the look of Sailor Moon's hair bun ornaments. I also used gold for other joint details and the weapon, and then added blue and red where necessary. I free-handed the ribbon and gold medallion on the chest, and I think it came out all right, especially compared to some more ambitious attempts at free-handing you'll see later. I did the base with the same thick mud as the previous mech, but painted it with grey, giving it the look of rough concrete. If I had to do this one again, I'd probably base coat in black and paint only the raised panels of the white section to give more contrast to the inner layers. I'd also have thinned my paints a bit more, as this one ended up looking a bit blotchy and undefined. And I can't help but notice how bad my coverage was on certain spots. I also needed to do more work scraping off excess glue on the bottom of the base from when I was priming the Mini, or when it was glued to a painting handle. And I recently got a Citadel painting handle which uses a clamp to hold onto the base, so this has become less of an issue. Either way, I still love this one. This is the Loki Mark II, and if you're savvy, then at this point you might be able to tell which collection of Battletech minis I purchased first. I'm actually really proud of how this one came out. The iridescent purple is real groovy, and I applied a purple wash from the Army Painter brand to darken the recesses in the sculpt. I then hit it with a pink dry brushing, which really nailed the effect of a sand-blasted paint job. I also love the contrast of the bright yellow canopy with the rest of the colors. The base is another thick mud paste covered in brown. The other examples of using this looked fine as sand or concrete, but I think this one could have used more details on the base. Still, I really like this one overall. This is my Warhammer. This is probably the only mech I've done so far that has a paint job that is even remotely suitable for combat, with a flat green color scheme reminiscent of old model battle tanks. With this attempt, I tried to get proper coverage with the different colors, though I definitely could have done better with the spillage of the yellow on the canopy. I also tried using blue with white highlights for the inside of the barrel, revealing them to be powerful, energy-based weapons. I kinda hit it a bit too hard with the cheap matte finish, which kinda gives it this weird, gooey look, but it's not too noticeable when you're not looking at it up close through a video like this. This was the start of me experimenting with base materials using cat litter painted over with brown, which doesn't look great, but really makes me want a crunch bar. In retrospect, I shouldn't have tried painting over a base material like this, but it's a lesson I wouldn't have learned if I didn't make the mistake to begin with, so here we are. This one is the Marauder, another classic mech design. This and the next one are a pair, and when I tell you what I based the paint job on, you'll likely be able to guess what the next one will look like. This color scheme was a reference to the extra life mushroom from the Mario games, with the guns having bullet bill decals that I freehanded with limited success. I also freehanded the eyes on the mech's legs, and I decided on this color scheme because I felt the shape of the two mechs have a similar profile to the mushrooms, and I'm mostly happy with how they turned out. Despite the lack of shading or washes on lighter parts of the mech, the base was another painted litter job, which once again looks terrible, but will soon be out of the era where I was doing this. The Marauder 2 is a heavier version of the Marauder. I don't really have much to add to this one that wasn't said about the previous, as it's a paired color scheme. But this one sports the red super mushroom colors. I actually did this one first before I had a selection of washes to use, which is why the coloring on the legs is a bit more flat. Either way, I think they make a pretty awesome pair. You might notice the framing and lighting is a bit different for a few of these, as my camera decided to do some autofocus shenanigans on my first attempt, so I had to reshoot. The Atlas is another mech that is iconic to the franchise and is often used in promotional materials. I didn't have a scheme in mind when I started this one, but I knew I wanted mostly black with the white for the skull face. I also wanted to try some more of my metallic paints for the weapons, and the end result kind of puts me in mind of the clown figurines people make in reference to the famous incident in 1973 on the Isle of Wight, where some kids encountered a strange being calling itself All Colors Sam. So in reference to those real-world events, I've given this mech the nickname Sandown. I had just bought the box of base terrain from Army Painter when I did this one, so I was itching to try it out. I painted the base, then glued the big rocks to their designated spots. Then I applied more glue and sprinkled the gravel on. This didn't work great on my first attempt, as the glue included with the terrain wasn't very strong. So I applied Gorilla Glue and tried again, and that worked out pretty well. What do you think? This mech is the Archer, specifically the Agincourt variant from MechWarrior 5. I'm a bit of a medieval history nerd, and I really love the color scheme on that mech, so I tried my best to recreate it on a mini. This one was a real challenge, given that I wanted to do the white correctly with the black recesses. Also, matching the line between the two colors was tough and required a lot of retouching. The gold armorial bearings were all free-handed and definitely a far cry from the actual symbols, but That's only noticeable when you're up close, such as in a video like this one. I wanted a snowy, rocky scene for the base, so I started by once again gluing down the large elements, followed by the smaller grain material. Once that dried in place, I gave it another thin coat of glue and sprinkled the snow on top, and I really like how it came out overall. The Centurion is another favorite of mine, and this is a special variant from the novels, the Yen Lo Wang. I had just finished the first book of the Warrior trilogy, which featured this mech, and I knew I wanted to take a crack at the paint job, which features a Japanese style sunburst motif. Turns out the Battletech Essentials box featured this exact model from the story, as well as some artwork that I used for reference. Once again, freehanding this was probably a bit too big a job for my skill level, and I probably should have used some masking tape to do the lines. But I managed to get it looking pretty good with some retouching here and there. I tried to go back to basics on the terrain using just rocks and gravel, with one piece of cork giving the effect of a fallen tree. This was an ambitious attempt to recreate my favorite Timberwolf pattern in MechWarrior 5 and MechWarrior Online, basically using the Franken pattern from those games, but coloring it with reference to the in-universe version of the Jurassic Park logo, which has the yellow background, which I always preferred over the red they used for the movie logo. Everything on this one was free-handed, and it was a huge chore and probably too ambitious. Still, I like how the skulls turned out, and it's a very striking paint job overall. For the base, this was the first time that I colored the edges in black instead of matching it to the color of the base decorations. My thinking being that it would help show that this is a slice of an actual scene being put on display, and I wanted to make it more verdant to give the feeling of a tropical setting to match the dinosauric inspiration. I followed the same pattern with this base, but glued on a lot more grassy material in the end, and in hindsight I kind of wish I had applied more, but that's something I can touch up again later. At the time of writing, this is my latest mini and actually has a bit of a story behind it. This is the Summoner, which is the favorite mech of a close friend of mine who is also a huge fan of the Battletech franchise. Many years ago, I bought him a bottle of Mount Gay rum for his birthday, and on the drive to his place, my car was totaled in a rear-end collision at the turnoff to his street. Mount Gay ended up being his go-to brand after that, so I decided to paint this mech to match the color of that brand's bottles. I used mostly metallics except for the canopy and the belly, and I think it turned out really well. I also added a reflection line to the canopy as a detail I've seen in other examples, and I want to start working to make them look less flat where I can. For the base, I wanted to create the look of a mech stepping over a river on a grassy field. I painted the base green first, then added the line of blue for the river and applied a few strokes of white to make it seem like flowing water. I then covered the river with gloss finish to give it more reflective look than the rest of my mechs and bases, which I usually finish with matte. What do you think? And that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think of the minis, and if you have any tips, tricks, or hacks when it comes to painting or the creation of this kind of content, or if you have any suggestions for content you'd like to see on this channel in the future. Thank you for watching, and good night.